Good evening. Before we start, I want to thank our instructors, and I want to thank my fellow classmates for the community that we shared. It was really nice. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I also want to thank those of you who came and because you supported veterans, and that's really a lot of work. And sometimes people who aren't involved in the military don't understand how much work that is. And I really appreciate the work you guys do. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, my name's Mark Curry, and the title of my story is When the Universe Speaks. Now, after I got out of high school, I went to college. And it took about 3 semesters before the universe spoke to me in the form of the dean to suggest that maybe I wasn't ready for college. And my grades backed that up. So I left college and went back to my hometown of Columbus, Indiana. And I got a nice job at a factory. Made a lot of money, had some good times with my friends. But I figured the universe had more in store for me than that. So I took myself to the recruiting office, and the Air Force hooked me in, and I made a 4-year commitment. And I really learned a lot and got a lot out of it. But when I finished the Air Force, I went back to college, and I actually graduated this time. And I got a good job, and I met Catherine, and we got married, and I figured the universe had me on that white-collar track to success. Until one day, when Catherine came home and delivered another message from the universe, when she said, "Have you ever considered joining the Peace Corps?" Well, you know, the Peace Corps is a government agency that recruits volunteers to serve overseas and provide developmental assistance. And when I was in the Air Force, I served for 1.5 years at Osan Air Base in South Korea, and that was a great adventure. I met a lot of Korean people. I explored the geography. I learned about the culture, and I thought going to another country would be a grand adventure. So went from the War Corps to the Peace Corps. And we were sent to Kingston, Jamaica. Now, at the time, I was a heavy smoker. I smoked 1.5 packs, 2 packs a day. And it didn't take long before I discovered that my very expensive nicotine habit and my very tiny Jamaican Peace Corps paycheck didn't really match up well. And I knew I was going to have to do something about it, but I was addicted. I had to have my nicotine, and I figured the universe would come up with something eventually. And sure enough, I got a letter from the Jamaican Natural Resources Department looking for volunteers to help save the blue-footed booby. Now, the blue-footed booby's pretty much like any other booby bird, except the males have these beautiful blue feet that they like to dance around with come mating time. And the blue-footed boobies were nesting on the Morant Cays. The Morant Cays are little islands on a barrier reef about 40 miles off the coast of Jamaica. And they're really tiny. One of them was just big enough for the smallest lighthouse you ever saw and a small fishing camp. And the fishermen were going over to the smaller islands and stealing the booby eggs to sell for a little bit of extra spending money. And the government wanted to put a stop to that. So they came up with this idea of having volunteers live on one of the smaller islands for 10 days at a time over a 3-month period. And I thought, that sounds like a great idea. So my Peace Corps buddy, Bruce, and I, we got a ride out to that island on a Jamaican Naval PT boat. And that's where we met Duffy. Now, Duffy is a Jamaican fisherman. And Jamaican fishermen are a very tough lot. Duffy had spent the entire 3 months on that island. It was no bigger than a Kroger parking lot. It really was just a big pile of sand on top of a reef. And there was no shade. There was no water, no electricity, just a bunch of weeds and tens of thousands of birds. And but Buffy was a pretty good guy, and we got along pretty well. Now, I'd come prepared with what I thought you might need for 10 days of living on a desert island. So I felt pretty comfortable with that, but I'd only bought 1 pack of cigarettes. Because, now, hear me out, 40 miles from the nearest cigarette shop, you know, once I go through that pack, I have no choice but to quit smoking. Sounds like a good plan, right? So anyway, I did manage to make that one pack last 2 days by, you know it, by inhaling every molecule of nicotine I could out of each and every one of those 20 cigarettes. And at the end of the second day, I inhaled that cigarette down to the filter, threw it in the fire, and that was it. It was a new me. I went to bed that night confident that tomorrow was going to be a new, healthier day for Mark Curry. Excuse me. So, well, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I began to sense the universe was going to be talking to me again. And Duffy woke us up. He had his flashlight out and was flashing it all over the tent and rifling through his bunk. And there was a fisherman that had come over from the other island, and they were whispering to each other. And we're like, Duffy, what's up? And he was like, oh, never you mind. Just go on back to sleep. I'll tell you when I get back. And we rolled back in our bunks, and we heard their dinghy motor off into the night. Well, it wasn't too long after that the Caribbean sun came streaming through the side of our tent. We woke up and went about doing our morning routine. And I'll be honest with you, it didn't take long before I wish I'd bought 2 packs of cigarettes. Because I was starting to jones, getting a little trembly, and my brain was telling me, I'm really looking forward to that morning nicotine. But no, because I was a quitter. I'd quit. And about that time, I noticed out on a reef, there was a sailboat that had run aground, and it was tilted this way, and there was a little dinghy going back and forth out there. And I figured that's what Duffy and the fishermen had been up to all morning. Well, Duffy came back a little bit later and hopped out of the boat, and he had a couple bags with him, and he told us what happened. Sometime during the night, that sailboat had run aground, and the passengers and the crew had abandoned ship and caught a ride on a passing freighter. Well, once a ship is abandoned at sea, it's free to salvage. And so the fishermen and Duffy had gone and found whatever they could of value off the ship. And Duffy had made a pretty good haul. He had some wine and crackers and some more wine, and we kind of helped ourselves to some of that. And but the prize was an audio cassette deck and a marine battery and a big pile of audio cassettes. And he threw one of those cassettes into the audio player, and it turned out to be French rock and roll music. And, well, we were feeling pretty fine and silly about that time. And so we started to do our own version of the Blue-Footed Booby Dance. And only we had a little John Travolta to it. And we had ourselves a good time. It was pretty silly. Well, at one point, Duffy reaches into a bag and pulls out, you guessed it, a carton of cigarettes. And I'm looking at that stunned. And I'm like, what the? I just can't believe it. One part of me is like, look at that. That's rather fortuitous. And the other part of me is like, no, you're quitting, man. It's too expensive. It's not healthy. And I took the pack and I looked at the carton. I'm twisting it this way and that, trying to figure out what the French writing's saying. And finally, I figured it out. It's saying, the universe wants me to light up. And I did. I grabbed that carton. I ripped it open. I took out a pack, pulled out the smoke, lit it up. And that was the first time the universe tried to make me quit smoking.